Pretty much all. I grew up in the west end of the city. I was on Ashburn, Strathcona, in that particular area most of the time.
Okay.
I played a lot of hockey. I played some lacrosse, but I was not into baseball too much or soccer. Yes, there was the sports then at the time was box lacrosse, and we had a pretty good team, but I stopped playing about midget, I guess. I broke my arm and decided that I wanted to play hockey more.
Yeah.
My lacrosse was played at Isaac Brock until I left there, but my hockey days were at the West End Orioles on Burnell Street behind the old Canada Bread. Well, when I played 1 year at Isaac Brock, and Paul Goodman was the coach. He was an ex-goalie. He played for Chicago Blackhawks, but he had a business to run, and he found it very difficult to get out on time and things like that. So I didn't play Bantam A hockey. I ran into a little bit of trouble at the clubhouse by having a say about who should play and that sort of thing, and that's how I wound up by going over and getting transferred to the West End Oriole organization and stayed there right through till I played junior hockey. Yeah, Andy Hevington, who went on to play with the New York Rangers for many years, I played a little bit with him, but he was 1 year older than me, and we had some good athletes there, but back into that era, I don't remember too many. In Orioles, it was Reggie Abbott I used to play, and Brian Roach. They were West End boys, so, but that's about really it as a memory of those teams. Yeah. Fellas that had maybe a chance at pro careers, I don't recall too many people before I got to junior, but in junior there was there was Angus Jukes, played for us in Brandon for 2 years, and he was pretty stocky, but he was short, but he went on to be a physician, I believe, a doctor for children, and so that was like he did not turn pro. And some of the other fellows at that time made different choices to go and play senior hockey in various spots, because to break into professional hockey at that time was very difficult because there was not that many teams. In fact, in the first year I played in the United States Hockey League, they had a ruling in there that each team had to take at least 2 rookies to get young fellas into the game. And a boy by the name of Joe Kaiser and myself, both from Winnipeg, were the 2 that Denver Falcons picked in the United States Hockey League that year. I laced on my first pair of skates, they tell me, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 or 5. My mother was responsible for that. She was a speed skater and had me out at the old Sherburne Park when they had ice there. My father, I don't think he ever had a pair of skates on, but he was very good at following me, and he traveled to every city that I played for and visited me during the wintertime throughout my whole career. My first skates were tube skates, I guess, the regular hockey-style skates that I think my mother wore, the speed skates, but not me. And I used to go skating with my mother at the old amphitheater too, and at times when I was growing up. She was a good lady. The equipment in those days wasn't the greatest, and we all played with hand-me-downs, I think, pretty well. I know in my case, I used to look forward to Christmas because that's usually when I got my hockey gear. Sports when I was young was good. It was the same story. Lots of fathers giving up their time and to coach and mostly shovel snow, I guess, because there was all outdoor rinks. There was only 2 indoor rinks at that time that I remember where we could go. One was the amphitheater, which was very seldom, and the other one was the Olympic rink out in the north end. My first organized hockey team, I guess, would be at the Clifton Playground. I would be about 10 or 11 years old, I guess. And that was really the first real organized hockey I played. The position I played, when I started out, I think in Bantam B, when I was around 12 years old, I think I was playing center ice. But I don't remember the reason I dropped back to defense, maybe because the other guys could skate faster than me, I don't know. But it was a coach at the West End Orioles at that time by the name of Bill McKenzie. He'd played with the Chicago Blackhawks, and he was an excellent coach, and he took me over, and whatever success I had, I owe to him. Talking about the start of hockey, West End Orioles was a very good athletic club at the time. As I say, we were behind the can of bread, and a boxcar was our clubhouse, divided in half. And it was well organized and had good volunteers, and it was an excellent athletic club at the time. The C-form was in existence when I was young, yes. It was usually a $50 or $100 gratitude, and I don't know what made me be so cocky, but I refused it, and I didn't sign one until I got to junior hockey, and I got a $500 twice for it, so I actually got $1,000 for my C-form at that time. Well, the old rinks in Winnipeg, as you talk about them, the amphitheater was the only one at that particular time that had artificial ice, and about the only time we got to play there was if we had to finish up a playoffs and it was too mild outside and we lost the ice. The Olympic rink, we could pick up the odd games there, but it was pretty cold. They used to open the back door and the front door so the ice could freeze, and it was not what you'd call classy. Going to the hockey games as a kid and going down to, at least say, the likes of the amphitheater where all the big games were, I didn't do too much of that. During the war years, they had some excellent hockey there with the service teams, there, Navy and Air Force and so on. But I just didn't get down there and that, and there was a good league in the Olympic rink out there, especially Sunday in the Catholic League and that, but I was living away out here in the West End, and that was away in the North End. It was a pretty long trip for a young guy, so I didn't get there too often. I used to like to watch Wally Stanowski play, and then I was quite a thrill to actually play against him one day. He played for Cincinnati in the American Hockey League when I played for Cleveland, and I used to like, just names are escaping me now, but I remember that that was one of the ones I think I was usually him at the corner pond.
Yeah.
Crozier was a good junior player, and we were defense partners, and that particular year that we played together in the Manitoba Junior Hockey League, we both made the first All-Star team. Joe went to Denver along with me, but was cut and wound up by playing in the Quebec League with Quebec Aces, and there he met a coach at Quebec was the one that finally took him into Toronto, and he got tutored there. I don't think Joe played too many games in the National Hockey League, but he certainly had good success as a builder and an organizer. My junior hockey career was with Brandon Wheat Kings from 1948, 49, 49, 50. And it was 2 great years. Really loved Brandon and liked playing there. It was just like playing for a professional team. We had a chance to practice every morning, and some of us went to school every afternoon, and it worked out pretty well. Playing for West End, winding up in Brandon was playing with the West End Orioles, and Bill McKenzie that I alluded to earlier, he was coaching Brandon at the time, and I guess he remembered the likes of Joe Crozier and myself and Reggie Abbott and so forth, and invited us to Brandon to play junior hockey, and we just sort of fit in, and he, as I say, he was really a good coach. Area rights at the time, I may not be right on this, but I think Brandon, because of the size of it, had a chance to take so many players, say, out of Winnipeg, and they were also allowed a couple of players or three out of the what we call the East. I remember when I was there, a fellow by the name of Frank King, Glenn Sonmore, and Ray Fredericks were all considered Eastern boys. So they played, and then it was Reggie, as I mentioned, and others here in Winnipeg. At that time in Brandon, there was about 4, maybe 5 local boys on the team, and we didn't have as many players as they have today because we could only have 15 players, dress 15 players. I'm sure there was some sad moments, but in the most part, it was so exciting to go and play hockey that you were with your friends and buddies. It was pretty good, and by playing in Brandon, of course, we came to Winnipeg every week. I think it was Wednesday nights to play the local teams, and so we always got in enough time to see Mom and give her a hug and a kiss, and so it worked out. My dad, as I say, went to all the games, so it was good. I enjoyed it. There was some good hockey players in Winnipeg. It was in Brandon, like I say, but in Winnipeg they had the likes of Andy Heventon, Fred Dunsmore, Nicky Hill, Boner Collins in goal for Monarchs, and Gordy Morrison played for Canadians. It was the Bell boy, Bruce Bell, and Jim Zary, and played for Monarchs. There were some good players, yes, and some of them got into some of the pro hockey, but it was pretty hard at that time to get to the top because, as you know, there was only 6 teams, and there was a lot of kids playing hockey in Canada at that time. And yeah, well, in Brandon, we won the first year we won the Manitoba Junior League, and then we won the Western League, and then we played for the Memorial Cup against the Montreal Royals, and we lost to them in a famous series of 8 games. Those days they didn't play a shootout or anything, and so one game was tied, and at the end of the 7 games we were 3.5 each, and we had to play the 8th game, and it was a good game, but we happened to lose that one, unfortunately. But Montreal Royals had a very good team too. They had Dickie Moore and Bobby Blue and Tommy Manistursky and George Knutson. They had a very strong team, and they'd picked up a couple of players where we didn't pick up any. We had a team meeting, and we could have taken 2 players, as I think I understand it, but the vote on the dressing room floor by the guys was to, as we used to call it, we went to the dance with what we had. Montreal Royals were very, very confident in themselves, and rightly so. They were a good team, and they played hard, and they had some good players like Tommy Manistursky on defense. He'd played for one of the Montreal senior football teams as a lineman or whatever he was, and he could belt you around if he got you close to the boards, and they were just. And Dickie Moore, of course, was quite cocky. He voiced his opinion at our bench more than once when they scored a goal or did something good. Yeah, losing in that at the end was tough, and we took a couple of penalties, unfortunately, and whether the fellas that tried to kill the penalty, myself included, whether we got a little panicky or what, I don't know, or whether Montreal just turned on the speed jets, and as I say, they had a very good team, and they got 2 goals on the 2 penalties, 1 goal on each penalty, and And then they got I can't recall a winner too much, but I do recall that the extra goal was scored on an empty net as we pulled our goaltender. I don't know whether I ever did. If they said I could come and try out, I went and tried, and I liked it so much. I know when I went to West End Orioles at the midget age, I didn't really make the team then because I was an import. But Bill McKenzie, again, who I say was a good man, he invited me to keep coming out to practices and play exhibition games. And that was great. And as luck would have it, or unluck for somebody else, one of the players that was on the team broke his leg, and I got his spot, and the rest was basically history. But I just had no idea that I'd ever play professional hockey in my own mind. I guess my dad thought I would, and he encouraged me, but I just didn't. I just went out and did my best, and was pretty pleased when I got chosen to be on a team. I signed it with Cleveland Barons of the American Hockey League, which was a independent organization, but a very, very strong hockey-owned team. There was a man in Cleveland at that time by the name of Al Sutphin who owned the Sutphin Inc. Company, and it was his team, and they were forever challenging the National Hockey League for the Stanley Cup, but of course it never took place. It was a little bit of publicity, I guess, in that sense. Well, the train, as far as I know, like we did have a connection to Cleveland right through Orioles and Brandon, but Rangers could have certainly been feeding Cleveland some help too. I'm not aware of that because that would be in the managerial end, and of course, I didn't know what was going on there, and that's winding up in Denver. The United States Hockey League at that time was in, I guess, a little bit of trouble that I didn't know about, but I actually was supposed to go to Minneapolis and play for a team by the Minneapolis Millers, and they changed their location and went to Denver, and we became the Denver Falcons. And so it was like I said earlier, it was a tough league to break into because of the number of hockey players, and but there was some strong, like, good cities. There was Omaha, Kansas City, St. Paul, Denver, and Milwaukee, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was quite a league, and it reminded me very much of that Slapshot show they showed. We were on a bus most of the time, or the train, either one. Growing up and going out of junior and going away to play and playing in Denver worked out pretty good for me. As I say, Joe Crozier was there to start with. So Joe was married at the time. I was not, and he invited me to stay with him and his wife in a house that they'd found to rent. And when Joe got traded away, Carl Kaiser, another Winnipeg boy, his brother Joe Kaiser was the other rookie, and he invited me to go and stay at his place with his brother Joe. So Carl was a defenseman on the Denver Falcons, and Joe was a centerman, and I was a defenseman. And so I lived with them. So it was really pretty nice to be away from home and not be living in a hotel room. And age had something to do with that too, because like we were 20, and I think the next youngest guy on the team was probably 23, 24 maybe. There was a lot of war veterans that were coming back and just finishing off. They were 20, 27, 28, 29 years old, and they were just getting in a couple of years of fun before they had to find jobs. At that time, I don't know whether I handled it properly or not, because you're young and you don't know, but it just didn't seem to be that. I heard that people wanted me. I know Chicago even drafted me, but I found out afterwards that they didn't pay the money up at the end of the day, and because they were told that not to do it. There was some sort of an arrangement there. And I know from the underground telephone calls from Detroit at that time and Toronto at that time that they were asking if they could make a deal for me, would I go? But never a deal was made as far as I could. Like, I never went, so I guess a deal wasn't made. when Rangers bought me from Cleveland, I was just ecstatic. I was very happy about the New York Rangers. I really liked the New York Rangers, and I liked the color of their sweaters. So I was very, very happy to go there. And I guess by that time I had gained a certain amount of confidence and played the game as best I could every night. And I guess I just felt good, and they kept me, and I was there for 2 years, and I got hurt at the end of the second season. One of my own teammates in practice threw a check at me, and my thigh pad must have moved, and I got a severe Charlie horse that they had to. We were practicing in Montreal for the last game of the season, and they had to fly me back to New York, and they operated on my leg, and I never really played in the National League after that. The coach that came on after that was a fellow by the name of Phil Watson, and he and I just chose to not be friends, I guess is the way of putting it. And we just parted. I just went home, and I wanted to play for Saskatoon, and they weren't going to let me. And I found a job, and I was working when they came in just before Christmas and said I could go to Saskatoon and play, because Saskatoon had a couple of injuries. And I wound up by going and getting back into hockey then. And Frank Boucher, who had been my coach and manager in New York, was in Saskatoon at that time. And I just stayed with them for the rest of my career, except in the last year I had obtained a job working at Carling's as a public relations, and they made some sort of arrangement with Mr. Perrin, who owned the Warriors at the time, for me to play and not lose my job. And I said okay, and I played that one last year. And then I tell the story. I was going to be 30 years old, or I was 30 years old, and I had 2 children and another child on the way, and I thought maybe I better get myself a real job. The first Rangers camp I was at was, I'm not too sure, but I think it might have been Guelph. It was in the east. We used to have some training camps in there with a.
Were there any familiar faces there?
Well, Don Raleigh. Familiar faces at the first camp I was at was Don Raleigh. Was there. Nick McCoskey, Wally Hergesheimer were Winnipeg boys. Eddie Coleman was a Winnipeg boy. Of course, Johnny Bauer, I'd played with him in Cleveland, so he was. So I really didn't feel strange. And there was a player there at the time by the name of High Buller, who had played in Cleveland, and when he'd gone to New York before, and I guess, filled his spot in Cleveland, and he kind of took me under his wing, and it was like the kiss of death for those guys that tried to help me, I guess, because he got traded away too, and he got traded. I think he went to Montreal, but that was pretty basically the end of his career. Yeah, I was. On my first camp, I guess it was one of those things. I couldn't believe this was all true, and I just sort of gave it my best, and I got lucky, and then they kept me around. That was something. The bright lights of New York. Yeah, that was something. As I say, I got help on the block where the fellas had been living. I guess we got an apartment there because that's where Hergesheimer and McCoskey had a place, and Buller had a place, and the trainer Frank Pace had a place, and other, like I think Charlie Rayner had lived there before. So we got an apartment there, and it wasn't really good. If you've seen Law and Order, it was in the Queens. That's sort of what it was like, but not as bad as it would look today. And it was not too bad. The next year we moved out further on the island and got into. We lived in the same complex as Ivan Irwin, Harry Howell, Dean Prentice. And Ivan Irwin. Anyways, it was a good group out there for our wives to get together. And when we were out of town, like they'd double up a little bit, and the ones that had kids would one of the wives that didn't have children yet would come over and stay with them or something like that, so that they weren't alone. They had a pretty good thing. We had to be pretty careful. We were warned about, even in those days, about like the women not going down to the washroom to do kids' clothes or anything like that without having somebody with them, and so on. And so our wife, like Harry Howell and I, Dean Prance, we'd maybe take a couple of beers each and go down and sit on the talk about hockey or whatever, and the girls would do the laundry that they had to do. But they told you there in a meeting at the start of the season to, first thing you do is get the locksmith in and change all the locks, because you didn't know who had keys to your apartment, and if you didn't go downstairs at nights by yourself, like as far as the girls were concerned, things like that. It was you had to be careful. Yes, Rangers were I think very well thought of, and I think they tried hard to please the people. We were in the old Madison Square Gardens, of course, and we didn't really have a rink to practice in because there was so many things going on in the gardens at that time. And there was a rink on the third floor called Iceland, and it had aluminum boards. It was more or less for the figure skaters and so forth. And we used to have to go up there and practice, but we had pretty tough time having a scrimmage because there was only one end that was actually developed for hockey, and so our practicing at that time was not the greatest, but we were treated good. These people that High Buller introduced me to, like they'd take us out for dinner, and it was good and very 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 well thought of. I do recall my first goal, and I do have the puck on the mantle at home. It was surprisingly enough, it was November the 11th. That would be 1953, and I can recall we were playing Chicago, and I called for the puck skating in from the blue line, and it was given. I slapped it, and it went in, and we won the game. And that's the first game that Rangers had beaten Chicago in a little while, anyways. So my first goal was a winner. Oh, good. It was good all over. It was loud, and New York with the various accents when they used to yell out at Richard and Richard, and that it was good. In Boston, the old Boston Arena there was in the railroad station, and if you were playing national anthem, you could actually feel it like this if the train went by. And I know that old Olympic rink you talk about, you've probably heard the stories about that, the guys that tried to have showers. I mean, Christ, there'd be ice on your body by the time you got back to the dressing room. It was cool. I never ever tried to shower there and all that. I would say yes to a degree, and that was the year after I'd been hurt, and I went to Rangers training camp, and I had a unpleasant experience with Phil Watson, the coach at the time, and he kind of made me feel as though it wasn't going to be pleasant. So what I tried to do there, I had a split contract, and I said, I can understand, like, I've been hurt and you want me to play and get into shape. I said, if you want me to play in Providence, which was Rangers farm team at the time, then pay me my National League salary, because I'm in the States, and in those days they weren't that high, as everybody knows. I says, I will go to Saskatoon with no problem whatsoever and play for my minor league contract, and that way there, then I'll be close to home, and it won't be as expensive. But I was told with no uncertain terms that wasn't going to happen. So that's when I went home, and I got a job, and as I said earlier, I got to play in Saskatoon by Christmas time because of the injuries. And in my own wisdom, I figured I'd really won, but I really didn't win because I only got paid for half a year. The first year in Denver, I was going with my wife. I'd met her in Brandon playing junior hockey. She was just 16 at the time, and I'd just turned 18. And we'd started going steady. So the year in Denver, we had been going steady that summer, and came home from Denver and we got engaged. But in those days, it seemed to me as though you got engaged and you waited a year before you got married. And that's pretty basically what happened. We got engaged, and then I went away and played in Cleveland, and she was quite annoyed at that because she thought she should have been with me. But we got married when I come home in the spring of the second year there, and she was with me the second year in Cleveland, and the 2 years in New York and Saskatoon, and one year we had a pro team in Brandon called the Brandon Regals that came out of Saskatchewan, and we tried 1 year out of Brandon, and it was a very good team too. We went to the Canadian Championship with that team, and so she traveled with me. And as my dad, as I said earlier, he was great because of the pass on the railroad. I guess he came to see me play in every city that I played for, not played in, but played for. They were all good. Gordie Howe was a tough one to play against because you had to earn his respect, and sometimes you got it and sometimes you didn't. Richard, I felt about Boris that if you played him fair and hard, he played you the same way. Beliveau was always a gentleman. The story about Beliveau, the first night he came to Madison Square Gardens to play against the Rangers, Frank Boucher was our coach, and he asked me, he said, "Bob, when was the last time you played forward?" And I said, "I think I was around 12 years old, playing Bantam hockey." And he says, "Well, you are tonight." And I took the face off and played center ice against Jean Beliveau all night long. And I guess I did a reasonably good job because I wound up being as well as a defenseman, as a defensive forward, and I skated a lot of nights covering Gordie Howe, Maurice Richard, Billy Mosienko, Teeter Kennedy, and I remember one night Teeter Kennedy shook my hand and said, congratulated me on the game. I think I'd limited him to 1 assist or something, but he was older than I am, and he says, "They must figure I'm making a comeback when they put a kid on me like you." Penalties. Yeah, I got a few, but I think most of them were the kind from just tripping or kneeing and that, not too much. I got a few fighting penalties, and I had enough common sense never to fight Gordie Howe. I had a couple of good ones there with guys, but not in particular. As I say, I think most of the penalties, when I got to that stage of the game, were just by boarding and things like that. The regular penalties. Junior hockey was a little different. I guess I got a little cocky there. I don't know, but I just felt as though I was playing the game, and I just stood up for some other players a couple of times, but I was considered, I guess, a good size in those days. I was 6'1" and between 180 and 190 pounds, but I only received one misconduct penalty in my whole career, and that was in Boston one night, and I got a penalty for tripping, and I didn't think I deserved it, and I went to our Rangers bench and I had a drink of water, and as I skated back and got in the penalty box, the referee told me that drink of water just cost me $25, because that was the fine in those days for a misconduct penalty. I guess probably the best scrap I had of all was with a fellow by the name of Red Eye Hay, when he was in Omaha and I was in Denver. Those fateful words came out of the referee's mouth. He says, "Stand back and let him go." So we had a pretty good scrap that night, and we shook hands at the end of the fight and took our penalties, and that was the last time we fought. But Red Eye, I don't really know him, but I know he fought every night in Omaha in the third period because he used to televise that period in Omaha, and he fought somebody every third period. And I got into some sort of a jam, and it was hard to feel because the players were all over the ice. But when Geoffrion hit Ron Murphy over the face with his hockey stick and did some damage, I was involved in that and pushing and shoving. But other than that, I think I do every year. It was a couple of instances. I think one year in Cleveland, I was with a fellow out of Pittsburgh by the name of Pete Backer, and we started doing a little bit of that. And they were going to put us on the boxing card at Christmas time and give us $500 each for boxing. And everything was fine until one of the reporters in Cleveland said that he thought it was enough of that nonsense. He'd watched me fight 2 or 3 times, and I hadn't won one yet. So that was the end of that. Probably Hal Lako.
Yeah.
Hal Lako, he was big and he was tough, but he had a bit of a mean streak in him.
Yeah. Well, he was big?
Well, fairly good. I mean, tall.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a good size, yeah. And he was kind of Boston's defensive forward, and I was, much to my chagrin, I was made into a forward because I didn't enjoy playing forward at all. And but when we were looking, like our centermen in New York at that time were Ronty, Raleigh, and Camille Henry. And I think Ronty was the heaviest, and he wouldn't be but 160 somewhat. I think Bones was about 150, and Camille Henry was about 140. And so that's when Beliveau came at 220 and 6'2" or 4" or something like that. And I could skate like Harry Howell was bigger than me, but I could skate better than Harry Howell as far as a forward like to go. And the other players we had at that time were defensemen. They were brute force. You know. That was just one of those bad things that happened, and from what I remember of it and what I read about it, it appears as though Ron Murphy was sort of helping me a little bit, and Geoffrion stepped in, but Ron didn't drop his stick, so Geoffrion picked up his stick and to fight back, and that's in the bad part. They flew me to New York to Montreal to sit before Clarence Campbell, and when Mr. Campbell asked me what I saw and I told him, he said it was a waste of time to bring you here, and he dismissed me, and that was all I was out of the room when they did the actual into it, because when you're fighting somebody else, you're not worried about the other guy, you're looking after yourself. Like I said, was an injury to a leg and coming back the next year and not getting along too well with the coach. And then I guess I always assumed I belonged to Rangers. And at the end, Frank Boucher wanted me to go back to Saskatoon as a player, and I declined because I was working, as I say, for Carlings at the time. And so then he offered me a playing coach's contract, and I said, Frank, I want to stay with my job. It's a good job, and I'm 30 years old, and so to the best of my knowledge, I was suspended because I tried to play for the Maroons that year. They were going to the Allen Cup, and they had a real good team, and I think they won it, but I couldn't get an amateur card, or at least they told me I couldn't have an amateur card. And I know the Maroons said to come and play with them and play road games, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. If I was going to play, I wanted to play all the time, and so that was really my last year was playing for the Winnipeg Warriors. And I doubt very much if I'd ever played for them if it hadn't been for a deal between Carlings, Mr. Howard Spawn at the time, and Mr. Perrin, giving me a bit of a break and leeway to hold my job and still play hockey. It was a very tough year because I used to have to get up so early in the morning and go to work and work for a while, and then go out to the rink and practice, and then go back after the practice to play or to work. I mean, If I was traveling out of town, I had to take my suitcase to work with me on Friday morning to leave Friday night to play Saturday somewhere. When I came home on Monday or Tuesday, I was straight to work with my suitcase until before I could get home at supper time, and I played many, many nights on a couple of soft-boiled eggs, and so it was a tough year. The Western Hockey League hockey caliber was excellent. You could go through. Edmonton was Detroit's team, Calgary was Chicago's team, New Westminster was the Bruins team, Vancouver was Rangers, Saskatoon was Rangers, Victoria was Canadians, and they had a lot of their people playing in these leagues. Even like in Winnipeg was Toronto Maple Leaf, had an affiliation there, and there was just some excellent players like Johnny Bauer, as I say, Gump Worsley, Chadwick played for Winnipeg. He went on to play for Toronto Maple Leafs. There was a couple of brothers, Eric Nestorenko. It's kind of hard just on the moment to come up with names, but I know they all had good players. Sid Finney played for Calgary, went on, and the goalie, what was his name? I can't think of it now. I'm sorry,
that's right.
But it was a good. Andy Hamilton played for Victoria. Reggie Abbott played for Victoria, and they all had great hockey careers. I guess I was starting to get tired, but mostly I thought that I got back to that point where I was 30 years old. I had my first little girl was getting ready to go to school, and I didn't want to be sending her to school and taking her out and putting her in school somewhere else and so on. And I guess, as I say, 11 years of being on the move like that was a long time. And had I not been able to have the job that I had at the time, I'm sure I would have played for much longer time. But when you were 30 years old and you went to apply for a job and you basically didn't have any experience, it wasn't a great motivator for someone to hire you. And I did have one person tell me, he says, "We don't hire hockey bums." And I said, I don't really consider myself a bum, or I wouldn't be here looking for a job. Thank you very much anyways. To stay in the game at that time, I was, as I say, offered a playing coach's job, and I probably could have strung that into just a coaching job, maybe, but I really didn't have any big plans to do that. I kind of wanted to stay home and sleep in my own bed for a while, I guess, and I did coach 13 years at the community clubs after I came home. I coached 1 year at the Isaac Brock Community Club, and then we moved from Valor Road out to where we were in Sturgeon Creek, and I coached for 12 years at Sturgeon Creek with my own boy. I guess we started out when he was around 5 or 6 years old, and I coached him until after midget, and then they amalgamated Woodhaven Community Club and Sturgeon Creek Community Club together, and Woodhaven had an excellent hockey coach at that time by the name of Billy Patterson. And I had another hobby at that time. I was training retrievers or hunting dogs, and really liked that. And I'd been coaching, as I say, and my son was getting tired of playing. He didn't want to go over to Woodhaven, and so when it all boiled down, that was kind of the swan song there. And I enjoyed it right up until that point. And I'm still a little bit involved. I'm still on the board of directors of the Manitoba Hockey Federation. It used to be called the Old Timers, as more people probably know it, and more of a benevolent association, and try to help players or old players, or young players too, if need be. I did play a couple of games for the brewery team, and I spent more time trying to get out of the road of somebody that was trying to hit me and knock me into the second row of the stands. And I came home one day after a particular game at the ex-Blue Bomber, Benson, Boom Boom Benson. He had spent the whole game trying to put me over the boards, I think. And I came home and I told my wife, Mimi, I said, I think I'm finished. And she says, good. I would say I had excellent friendships during my career, but most of them are gone now. I had some great friends in New York that we corresponded with for long after my days there. I stayed great friends with Bill McKenzie. He went, after hockey days, he went to work for the Liquor Control Board, and I stayed good friends with him. I stayed good friends with Joe Crozier. Although we don't see each other very much, he's living in Buffalo now. But whenever we get a chance, it's like we're just like two brothers, I guess. And I was very good friends with Vic Lynn. Vic Lynn is gone now, so that's my problem. I'm 83 years old now, and the guys that I looked up to and so forth are at least my age or older, and most of them haven't been quite as fortunate as me. Hockey helped me all the way through. There's no doubt about it, because being a sales rep or a public relations rep for the brewery, and then for the distillery, which I spent 20 years with Hiram Walker's, I took over Manitoba from Baldy Northcott, who's an ex-hockey player, as probably everybody in Winnipeg knows. And when he wanted to retire, he got me to leave Carling's and go to work for Walker's. And I was there 20 years, and I guess I just, like right now, I had the gift of the gab and like to shake hands, and I got along pretty well. At Hiram Walker's, I made the president's table one year as one of the top salesmen in Canada. There was two of us, my partner by the name of Emil Moskal, who is gone now, and myself, and we were the top salesmen in Canada, and wound up at the big convention in New Orleans and treated there like royalty, and got the big ring, and it was good. I guess somewhere along the line, I don't know how you think. I know at this particular time I've got 2 artificial hips, and I've got a pacemaker, and I got one knee that hurts. But I think I was pretty lucky. I don't recall. I recall 2 or 3 pretty good head bangs, but so far the good Lord's looked after me, and I've been able to stay on top.